Welcome to the Bookworm Duo, where we explore a variety of books. Let's get started.
Sounds good to me.
Today, you've brought us Frozen River
I have.
by Ariel Lawhon,
Yeah.
which is set in, I believe, late 1700s Maine.
Right around the turn of the 19th century.
And this is historical
Yes.
fiction, but based on an actual historical diary.
That's right.
And so for this deep dive, what I thought we would do is go through the book sort of chronologically
Chronologically, yeah.
and just kind of hit the events.
The major plot points.
Yeah, the main things that happened.
Sounds good.
So, the main character, or at least who we see the story through, is Martha Ballard,
That's right.
who is a midwife.
A very busy midwife in this small town.
Yeah, and she keeps a diary.
Yes.
And so a lot of this is her just going about her days. But, of course, there's this central mystery.
That's right.
And the story actually starts with a body.
Yes, it does. A very intriguing opening to this novel. It starts with a prologue,
Right.
where we see a frozen body
Yes.
being discovered in the Kennebec River.
Yeah, it's winter.
Yes.
And the river has frozen over.
Really freeze.
Yeah.
And the body is discovered by, of all things, a fox.
Right.
Kind of a mystical element right there at the beginning.
Yes, I remember you saying that was one of the things that you thought was just so cool about this.
Yeah, it's great foreshadowing, I think.
Yeah.
And a very symbolic opening to the book.
Yeah.
So we have this fox that discovers the body. It's trapped under the ice. We don't know who it is.
Right.
But it sets the stage for the mystery that's to come.
And the prologue, I mean, it really just kind of sets that tone for the whole book
It does.
of the harshness, right?
Yeah.
Of this environment.
Yes.
I mean, you really feel that cold.
You do.
But then, then we get to Martha, and she's attending a birth.
Yeah, we go from death to life immediately.
So she's at the home of Betsy Clark.
Betsy Clark, right. Having her third child.
Yeah, it's a girl.
It is.
And it, Lawhon does a really good job of kind of giving you those details of how births were in that time period.
Right.
Martha is, she notices that the baby doesn't have a cleft palate, which is apparently a big relief.
Yeah, she calls it a tiny miracle.
Yeah.
That it doesn't have that. So she's very relieved for the family.
And it's just so interesting, I think, too, the way that Martha thinks about things. Like, she has these thoughts about Charles Clark, who's the father of the baby.
Yes.
And the way they interact.
Right. She kind of looks down on him.
Yeah, it's very
She's not impressed.
no, not impressed.
Not impressed.
And then she has this walk from Betsy's house to the forge. And it's a short walk, but it's kind of significant.
It is, yeah.
Because it's like she's going out into the night, right? And it's this unknown. And then she encounters James Wall at the forge, and that's really kind of where things take a turn.
Yeah, that's where the mystery really starts to ramp up.
Yeah.
He comes to her with this urgent message that she's needed back in town.
Yeah, and it's all very, like, mysterious.
Wait, very mysterious.
Like, he doesn't really say.
He's vague about it.
Yeah.
He says they found something and she needs to see it, but he won't elaborate.
Right, and then it's Amos Pollard,
Amos Pollard, right.
who is the one who insists that Martha be the first to see whatever it is they found.
Yes.
And he even says that she'll have a particular interest.
Or particular interest.
Which is very intriguing.
Very intriguing.
Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, you're like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So despite her reservations, it's late. She's just attended this birth. She agrees to go with them.
Yeah.
And they set off for Pollard's Tavern, which is where they're going to view this thing.
Right. And this is kind of as the sun is starting to rise.
Right, at the break of dawn.
Yeah.
And they get there, and there's this smell of smoke in the air.
Yeah.
And Pollard's Tavern, as we find out, it's kind of the central hub of this town.
It is.
It's not just a tavern. It's a gathering place. It's used for all sorts of things.
It's like the community center.
Just like the community center, yeah.
It's used as a courtroom. It's used as a temporary mortuary.
Right.
And it's even mentioned that it was once used as barracks
Yes.
during the war.
Yes.
And even has a connection to Sarah White, who we'll talk about later.
Right.
Because her daughter was born there.
I was born there when it was barracks, yeah.
So it's just this place where, so much of the town's history and life is contained within those walls.
Right.
And inside, it's this chaotic scene.
Right. It is, yeah.
I mean, you've got these drunken men.
Drunken men.
One of them being Chandler Robbins, who's kind of a recurring character.
Right.
And Moses Pollard, who we'll also talk about later,
Yes.
who's Amos's son.
Oh, great.
And Moses is trying to, keep things under
Just
control.
keep things orderly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a grim situation, and Amos is giving this kind of stark description of the body.
Yes.
And then Martha finally gets to see it.
Right.
And her medical expertise kicks in.
Immediately.
Yeah.
She notices these rope burns around the neck.
Yes.
But there's no rope.
Right.
Which is very strange.
Yeah.
And she suspects that the body is Joshua Burgess.
Right.
But she's not entirely sure.
And then she goes home. Right.
She does.
But when she gets back to her house, her daughters, Dolly and Hannah, are just coming back from a frolic.
A frolic.
Yeah, which was very fun.
Yeah, it does.
And we'll come back to this frolic later because it turns out to be pretty important.
It does, yeah.
But then Martha ends up back at the tavern to treat Sam Dolan.
Sam Dolan, right?
Who's injured because he fell through the ice at the frolic.
Right.
And she questions him very subtly about the frolic and about Cyrus, her son.
Yes.
Trying to piece together what happened.
Yeah.
Then Jonathan Ballard, who's Martha's other son, arrives to take Sam home.
Right.
And Martha questions him as well about Joshua Burgess and the frolic.
Yes.
And then she confronts her own son, Cyrus, about it.
Right.
And he's mute, as we find out.
He is.
But his reaction is very telling.
It is.
It's like he's surprised or startled.
Yeah, he's definitely hiding something.
Yeah.
Or knows something.
Yeah.
That he's not sharing.
Right.
And this inability for Cyrus to speak becomes a really important part of the story, I think.
It does.
Because it limits how he can interact with the world. And especially in a situation like this where he might be a witness.
Right.
Or even a suspect.
Right.
It adds this whole other layer of complexity to the story.
Yeah. And then there's this little side note where Martha talks about her horse, Brutus, and how unreliable he is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of a humorous moment, amidst all this darkness and mystery.
Yeah.
Just a reminder that life goes on.
Yeah, even with an unreliable horse.
Even with an unreliable horse.
Okay, so that's kind of the first part, the opening, right?
Yeah, the setup.
And then we get to part 2, which is called To Housekeeping.
The housekeeping, yes.
And this starts with Martha visiting Rebecca Foster.
Rebecca Foster at the parsonage.
Yeah, and Rebecca had been assaulted a few months prior.
That's right.
So she's still recovering from that.
Yeah.
And she's very frail, and it's a very uncomfortable scene.
It is.
I mean, they're having tea and trying to be polite.
Trying to be polite.
But there's this underlying tension, right?
Yes.
And Martha notices these tins.
She does.
Containing savin and tansy.
Sabin and tansy.
Which are abortifacients. Right. Which are herbs that can be used to induce abortion.
Yeah.
And this discovery really reveals Rebecca's fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
About her situation.
And she's worried about her husband, Isaac Foster.
Yes.
Who's the reverend.
Right.
And he's involved in this lawsuit against the town.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on there.
There is.
And Martha is, she's bothered, I think, by what Rebecca's hinting at.
She is.
And the lack of justice for what happened to her.
Right.
And then she goes back to Ballard's mill.
She does.
And Cyrus has left a note saying he's gone to the hook with Moses.
With Moses.
Yeah.
And this absence of Cyrus kind of triggers Martha to reflect on the events that happened after Rebecca's assault.
Right.
Back in August.
Yeah. And she thinks about how she cared for Rebecca, but she didn't report the crime.
Right.
Right away.
Right.
And she regrets that.
She does.
She feels like she missed an opportunity.
Yeah, she missed an opportunity for timely justice. And she goes back and reads her diary entries from August and September.
Yeah.
And that's when she realizes that Rebecca was probably afraid of being pregnant.
Right.
From the assault.
And then she starts to think about Isaac Foster and if he might be seeking revenge.
Right.
Because of what happened to his wife.
Right. Could he be involved in Burgess's death?
Yeah.
Is that a possibility?
So she decides to talk to Ephraim about all of this.
To Ephraim, yeah.
And Lawhon does a good job again of kind of describing this journey to the mill in the winter.
Right.
And the water wheel is frozen, so Ephraim can't work.
Yeah.
It's just a reminder of how hard life is in this time period.
It is.
And when she finally gets to talk to Ephraim, she's worried about a lot of things.
She is.
I mean, she's worried about retaliation against Cyrus.
Right.
Or even against Isaac Foster.
Right.
And she's worried about Joseph North, who's kind of this this shadowy figure in the background.
Yes.
And Ephraim picks up on something.
He does.
He asks uh, about when James Wall arrived at the forge.
Right.
And he's implying that maybe North knew about Burgess's death even before Wall got to Martha.
Right.
Which is kind of creepy, right?
It is.
Like, how'd he know?
Yeah.
And then there's this detail about the black fox again.
Right. Yeah.
That she saw near their south pasture.
Yes.
And she had heard people talking about a black fox at Coleman's store earlier.
Right.
So it's like this weird coincidence.
Yeah, and it's almost like a supernatural element, you know?
Yeah.
Like this black fox is watching everything.
Yeah, very mysterious.
Okay, so then we move on to part 3.
Okay.
Which is called courtship.
Courtship.
And this part starts with a justice of the peace court meeting.
Right.
Which is held at Pollard's Tavern.
Of course.
Of course.
And there are all sorts of people there.
Right, all the townsfolk.
Yeah, and it's clear that these meetings are kind of a big deal.
They are.
For the community.
Yeah.
It's where they deal with legal matters.
Right.
And it's also a place where people just kind of gather and gossip.
Right.
And we learn that Martha has this duty.
She does?
She has to question unwed mothers about the fathers of their children.
Yeah.
Which is mandated by this law.
Right. The Act for the Punishment of Fornication and for the Maintenance of Bastard Children.
Yeah, quite a mouthful.
It is.
But yeah, she doesn't like doing it.
No, she finds it very distasteful.
Yeah.
But it's her duty.
Yeah, she has to do it.
She has to do it.
So then they start the proceedings about Joshua Burgess's death.
Right.
And Dr. Page, who we met earlier, he presents his findings.
He does.
And he says that Burgess drowned.
Right.
And that the injuries Martha saw were post-mortem.
Right.
So he's basically dismissing the possibility that he was hanged.
Yes.
Which is interesting, right?
It is.
Because it contradicts what Martha saw.
It does.
And then North questions Martha specifically about finding a rope.
Right.
Which is kind of an attempt to discredit her.
It is.
Like he's trying to make her look bad.
Yes.
And then William Pierce and his daughter Sally come forward.
They do.
And they're bringing charges of fornication.
Right.
Against whom?
Well, this is where things get a little personal.
Okay.
Sally names Jonathan Ballard as the father of her child.
Oh, wow.
So Martha's son.
Yeah.
Which is a big scandal.
Yeah. And how does Martha react to this?
She's furious.
Yeah, I bet.
She confronts Sally and her father. She reveals that Sally was eavesdropping.
Oh, wow.
And she defends Rebecca Foster.
Right, because Rebecca had said she hoped that Isaac had killed Burgess.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like this very intense scene, right?
It is.
Where you see all these different loyalties and relationships playing out in this courtroom.
And how limited the power that women have. You know, they're dependent on their husbands and fathers for everything.
Yeah, it's a very different time.
It is.
Okay, so part 4 is called The Survey.
The Survey.
And this part starts with a flashback.
It does.
To a hanging that Martha witnessed when she was
Right,
younger.
yes.
The hanging of Billy Crane.
Billy Crane.
And her parents react very differently to this.
They do.
Her father is upset by it.
He is.
But her mother is more pragmatic.
Yeah, she's like, this is just how things are.
Yeah.
And Ephraim insists that Martha watch it.
Right.
Which is kind of disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hanging.
A hanging.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not something you'd want to see.
Right.
Especially as a young girl.
But it was a public spectacle in those days.
Yeah.
And I think Ephraim wanted her to see it as a lesson,
Yeah.
you know, about the consequences of bad actions.
Yeah.
And then back in the present, Martha and Ephraim are discussing the hanging. And Ephraim reveals that he actually testified against Billy Crane.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I think, a surprise to Martha.
Yeah, it is.
And then he shows her this new knife he got.
Yeah.
He calls it Revenge.
Revenge. That's not ominous at
No,
all.
not at all.
And then Ephraim reveals that Judge North has commissioned him to do a survey of some land.
Of some land, yeah.
And Martha suspects that this is a punishment for her speaking out against North in court.
Right.
But Ephraim hints that there might be more to it.
Yeah, he says there might be more to it.
He doesn't say what, though.
No.
And Martha is worried about him being gone.
She is.
And about his safety.
Right. She's worried about what North might be up to.
Okay, part 5 is called False Labor.
False labor.
And this starts with Martha going to Sewell Chandlery to attend to Grace Sewell.
Grace Sewell.
Who's in labor.
Right.
And we meet Grace's mother, Mrs. Hendricks,
Mrs. Hendricks, yes.
who's quite a character.
She is.
Very overbearing.
Yeah.
Very overbearing.
And Dr. Page is there.
He is.
And he's given Grace laudanum.
Right.
Which Martha knows is dangerous if she's not actually in labor.
Yeah, it can be very dangerous.
And they argue about it.
They do.
Martha and Dr. Page.
Right.
And Mrs. Hendricks initially defers to Dr. Page because, he's the doctor.
He's the doctor.
Even though Martha's the one with experience in childbirth.
Right.
But Martha refuses to leave until Grace and the baby are safe.
She does.
And it turns out she was right to be worried.
She was.
Grace has this really long and difficult labor.
Right.
Despite the laudanum.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a pretty tense scene.
It is.
Okay, part 6 is called The Rushing River.
The Rushing River, yes.
And this starts with James Wall being arrested.
He is.
Because he can't pay his debts.
Right.
And the officer who arrests him is really rough with him.
Yeah, it's a pretty brutal scene.
Yeah.
And then Abigail Pollard, who's Amos's wife.
She shares this rumor that James was planning to start a distillery.
Oh.
And that he had tried to get a loan from Judge North.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So North is involved again.
North is involved again.
And Martha questions Abigail about Amos's knowledge of Burgess's death.
Right. She's still trying to figure out who knew what and when.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Lambard.
Who we know as Barnabas.
And Barnabas, yeah.
He visits Martha and asks her about Cyrus's character.
Right.
He wants to know if he thinks Cyrus could have murdered someone.
Right.
And Martha defends Cyrus.
She does.
She says he would never do that.
Yeah.
And we also see that Dolly, Martha's daughter, is interested in Barnabas.
She is.
And then Martha writes in her diary that an officer was looking for Captain Burgess with an arrest warrant.
Right.
So Burgess was in trouble even before he died.
It seems so.
Okay. Part 7 is called Going to Housekeeping.
Going to housekeeping.
And this part starts with Martha at Dr. Coleman's store. And she sees that Sarah White is being ostracized.
Ostracized by the other women in the store.
Yeah.
They're gossiping about her.
Yeah. And it's really cruel.
It is.
And Martha defends her.
She does.
She stands up for her.
Yeah.
And she even reveals some embarrassing secrets about the other women.
She does.
To get them to shut up.
To shut them up, yeah.
Which is, I don't know, it's kind of satisfying, I guess.
It is, in a way.
Like they deserve it.
Yeah.
And then Coleman praises Martha for what she did.
He does.
And he tells her that Sam Dowling and May, who we learned about earlier,
Right.
they're renting the old McMaster place across the river.
Right.
Which is interesting because there were all those rumors about them.
There were.
And Coleman also warns Martha that Joseph North dislikes her.
Yes.
And is trying to turn people against her.
Right.
Because of, the things she's done.
Yeah, the Burgess situation and the difficult birth with Grace Sewell. Okay, so part 8 is called A Bird in Hand.
A Bird in Hand.
And this is where Joseph North actually comes to Ballard's Mill.
He does.
He comes with his wife, Lydia.
Yeah.
And his dog, Cicero.
Cicero.
Yeah.
And he pretends that he wants to talk to Ephraim.
Right.
But Martha sees right through that.
She does.
And she confronts him.
She does.
About his attempts to undermine her.
Right.
And then Ephraim's falcon, Percy, arrives.
Percy arrives. Yeah.
And North is, he's startled.
He is.
And he leaves pretty quickly.
He does.
Like he's scared of Percy.
Yeah, it's almost like Percy is a symbol of Ephraim's power.
Yeah.
And then Moses Pollard shows up with flowers for Hannah, who's Martha's daughter.
Right. And he's disappointed that Ephraim's not there.
He is.
And then Cyrus comes back with a chicken.
A chicken for Percy.
Yeah.
And he and Moses kind of tease each other.
Yeah, it's a little moment of levity.
A little moment of levity amidst all this tension.
Okay, part 9 is called Winter Court.
Winter Court, yes.
And this takes place in Vassalboro.
It does.
Where they're having the Winter Court session.
Right.
And North is there.
He is.
As a defendant.
As a defendant.
And Rebecca Foster is there with Isaac.
Right.
And North avoids looking at Martha.
He does.
But he still manages to convey this threat.
Right.
Like he's watching her.
Yes.
And then Barnabas Lambard testifies.
He does.
And he talks about apprehending Burgess.
Right.
And he describes all the injuries he saw.
Right, which contradicts Dr. Page's testimony.
Yeah.
He says that Burgess was beaten very badly.
Right.
and that his injuries were not post-mortem.
And he even mentions that Henry Sewell gave him some court records.
Right, which suggests that there are people who are trying to uncover the truth
Yeah.
about what happened to Burgess.
And Barnabas also mentions this rumor
He does.
that Isaac Foster might have been involved in Burgess's death.
Right, based on something a former servant of his said.
Yeah.
And North tries to downplay this.
Of course he does.